Hey, everyone, and welcome to the Invisible Obvious podcast, a place for conversations to explore greater awareness, integration, and accountability for leaders today. I am Daniel Paulish, your host, and I am super excited to welcome my guest today, Elizabeth Tenety. I call her Liz, and I hope that's okay for this conversation.
Go for it.
Yeah, Liz, welcome. I want to give a little background about you and then let you introduce yourself because we have, I think, an interesting, history. Liz and I first met when she was serving as the editor of a national blog of top thought leaders for the Washington Post. She was working with some of the best voices in the country and in the world, and I had an opportunity to work with one of those and also guest blog for that particular blog. So that was our first touch point.
That's right.
And then I was later super smart enough to hire her for the next organization I was working for to help that team really upskill into digital content in the social media world. She brought her expertise and she really elevated the work we were doing with a national magazine that was well known in New York and just helped the team grow tremendously. And then finally, my favorite quick story is when she came to me towards the end of that and said, I need to talk. Let's go walk in Central Park. And I'll never forget this conversation we had on a bench. And she said, I'm so grateful for this opportunity, but I think I need to jump off and start a new adventure. And I said, tell me about it. And she'll tell you a little bit about that. But I was so proud and so pleased and so encouraging that she took this leap. Has been wildly successful and is learning a lot about leadership in the reality of all that. So that's my background for Liz. And Liz, why don't you tell us, how you got to where you're at, and your story a little bit, because I know you're a podcaster yourself, so this is a comfortable venue for you.
Totally. I do remember that Central Park bench. Hopefully we can stroll along there sometime again together. Sometimes I say that I'm passionately agnostic. Like, I have a lot of convictions and a lot of openness in the midst of those convictions. And so when I think about my career, I never could have predicted where it has landed me. And yet the next step has seemed to always make sense, at that moment. I'm a hard worker, but I also know that I got really lucky in my opportunity to start my career at the Washington Post. I was a student at Georgetown, and I think a theme of my life has been to say yes to new adventures and to want as many doors opened as possible.
Jump in there quickly, because that has been a theme for me as well. Work with the very best people, keep learning, push yourself, and be open. And that's been the secret to my entire career.
Oh, I love that. And who knows? And I think back then when I started my career, I was at Georgetown, and I was working with a student center there that I was so excited to be a part of. They were launching a new center for religion and politics, and my professor was launching it. Sorry, that's my dog. Real life happens here, and he didn't actually ask for students to volunteer, but again, I think this was kind of how my career has unfolded. I went up to him and said, like, what can I do to get involved? You're building this thing. This was, oh goodness, 15, 20 years ago, somewhere in that time range. And he said, sure, let's see what we can get for you. I started doing data entry on a database that he was building of religious rhetoric and politics. And honestly, I would just take as much work as he could give me. And I had also concurrently been working as an intern for George Will, the columnist at the Washington Post. That was an introduction from a friend. I did not seek that out. That was a friend recommending me out of the blue. So I had these kind of working internships. And then the Washington Post, unbeknownst to me, approached the center that I was working at as a student, saying, we want to launch a podcast about religion on campus. Not a podcast. We want to launch a project about religion on campus. And again, I was like, oh, please pick me. I'll do anything. I love journalism. I'm from a family of news junkies. Like, NPR is in my blood. We've always had the TV on it's always the news, Yeah. So I always thought about the world from that perspective of culture, headlines, values. And so I got this opportunity at the Post, and I kept going. So the Post started a student publication. I did that unpaid for a few years. Then they said, hey, we have this part-time role. Are you interested in it? And I said, yes. And on from there. And I got to, when I left the Post, I was kind of there in a variety of capacities for about 8 years. When I left the Post, I was editor of On Faith, which was our section about religion and spirituality. I was at the Post at a time when, they were basically kind of deputizing millennials to
Huh?
figure out the internet, and it was very scary but very exciting. We had, you wake up and a million people are reading what you do, right? So
Yeah.
the stakes are so high, but also we got to innovate in a really cool way. And a lot of the people that I worked with at that time have gone on to become founders. The founders of Vox, for example, were in that kind of cohort where we're just experimenting out loud, with the Washington Post. And it was amazing. I learned so much.
And I
Move,
visited you there. Like,
you've,
talk about high stakes. People think about the movies where you're in the press room, and there's all the cubicles and people are working away. This is what Liz was working in, with a influencer who had quite a personal history and a
mhm,
network of people. So she was bringing all these people to this project, and then Liz was asked to kind of do all the heavy lifting editing work
it's
to
true.
take their thoughts and help shape them into what the actual blog was. So
Exactly.
wonderful experiment, and it was a lot of work for you and a lot of learning in the process, I'm sure.
Yeah, it was an incredible gift that if someone told me how hard it was, how scary it was, it would have been. I'm not sure I would have signed up for it. But, we worked with some of the most influential thought leaders in the religion and spirituality space. And my job, I think of as kind of a conductor. My job was to figure out who to kind of pass the mic to at any given moment, whose perspective on religion and public affairs, public life, do we need to hear from now? At the Post, though, I did work with a lot of very famous and influential people. And I think relevant to your audience and kind of going deeper, I'm so grateful that I got to do that because of this kind of unexpected lesson, which is I learned very early in my 20s, probably by like 23, 24, that being rich and famous didn't make you happy. And I think I might have spent a lot longer pursuing like personal, um, you know, uh, just fame and fortune. I think I would have believed that that was some sort of land I wanted to end up in. And I met so many famous people, and certainly some of them are lovely and healed and whole. And some
Right.
of them were so deeply troubled that I realized, okay, that
Yeah.
isn't the key to success. And I always think of that as one of the important lessons of that time.
Yeah, and you and I think that maybe that's one of the reasons we connect so deeply is because I was in the Hollywood world, right? Also working with very famous people, first as a performer in the Broadway world and celebrities, and then working for the most successful producers in Hollywood at the time, where we had everyone coming in to pitch. And
Mm-hmm.
I saw the same thing. It was like, wow, there's a lot of brokenness here. I mean, we need
Yes.
people that have tremendous success and a tremendous personal brand. There was this level of desperation of like, I got to keep up on the top of the mountain somehow. So it absolutely informed me to pull away. I tell people I pulled away from the bar, basically, of getting out of Hollywood and starting a new chapter, because I was gifted to work with the very best people. And I got to see what I needed to see, that it was a commodities business. It wasn't as creative as people thought it was.
Yeah.
It's the biggest export business we have in this country, entertainment.
Mm.
And so it kind of informed that. But also, this kind of takes me to the next point, and you're going to talk about Motherly, I know, but
Yes.
you have a pretty profound personal life.
Mm.
Five children is a pretty remarkable accomplishment in and of
Mm-hmm.
itself. I
Mm-hmm.
have, and so that's been part of this journey for you too, right? As these
Mm-hmm.
things have unfolded, how to match and balance that out with what your ambition or your desire is from a career perspective, and to work as a leader, right?
It's true. I didn't think I was going to be a working mom. I, grew up at a time of the mommy wars, and what I absorbed was negative rhetoric around being a working mother and that it wasn't possible to have it all. And so I began my career looking for flexibility. And in fact, it's part of why I chose journalism. And I wouldn't necessarily have given myself the same advice today that I
Mm.
intuited back then. But I have just an incredible husband and partner, and we met in college. So we met young and have kind of had to knit our lives together. Um, he was getting out of the military when we had our first child, so I needed to keep working. He was about to be unemployed. So even though I kind of thought I would lean out and focus on my own family, I ended up needing to be the breadwinner in our family for those years when he went to business school. And then when we were living out in California in Silicon Valley and my husband was in business school, I had a light bulb moment. I was a mom of two. I was yet again in my kitchen after a long day and cleaning up and really pondering what to do with this feeling that I started to have in my career about 10 years in, which was like, I think I want to build something. I know how to grow audiences and create content. And what would it mean for me to be that entrepreneur? It's people describe it as an itch. That is what it felt like. And so, Dan, that's when you and I were working together at that national magazine,
Right.
doing work that was important. But to me, that work was, it felt easy. And there was something in me that wanted that next challenge in life. And so the light bulb moment was, oh, the thing that needs the most innovation is this experience that I had been through of becoming a mother. And so there was no online platform to become a mom. There was online platforms to buy a car and plan a wedding and buy a house, but nothing for, frankly, what was the most transformational journey of my life, which was becoming a mom. And certainly becoming a parent in general changes every aspect of your life. Becoming
Sure.
a mom, certainly on another level. I had this concept for a new digital platform for a new generation, supporting women through the journey of motherhood. I knew how to build an audience. I didn't know how to build a corporation. And so I looked for a co-founder to pitch this idea to, found one in my partner, Jill Koziel. That was 8 years ago. And kind of been off to the races ever since. Motherly is venture backed. We just closed our Series B this summer, and it has been an incredible education. And I have grown my family, went from 2 kids when we first started Motherly to 5 kids. I just had a baby earlier this year. And I've learned more than I would have expected about running a family from running that startup and growing this company. And then about 2 years ago, I actually stepped down from day-to-day operations. So I got us from idea in my kitchen to, venture capital raised and some really exciting, growth benchmarks. And then got to a point where I realized through a lot of different points of reflection, and again, my own husband's encouragement, I realized that my zone of genius was in building and creating and not the kind of ongoing operations.
Yeah.
And that was time for me to step into a more strategic role and away from day to day. And that's where I am now. I also do consulting and in a variety of ways today. And I'm incubating some new business concepts that I want to bring to market in the next year.
Yeah. That's awesome, Liz, on so many levels. For your network that I hope watches this, I just want them to know, first again, how proud I am of you as a friend to have the courage to step out and do that, because it takes a lot of courage to raise that kind of venture capital. You certainly have the talent and the confidence behind it to do that. There's a million digital platforms out there. Some of them go, most of them don't.
Yep.
So, I mean, that's remarkable. But I think more importantly, this partnership you've had with your husband is so terrific to hear about. I met you when he was deployed, right? And I was like,
Yep.
how is that working, right?
Yeah.
And then you guys have persevered through all kinds of interesting professional challenges and opportunities. You've moved several times,
Mm-hmm.
and so you recently just moved. And so
Yes.
I just want to hold that up for
Thank you.
whoever's listening to this, that it can be done. Now, she's a bit of a superwoman in many ways, and she has help, but I just think it's admirable because you've kept your family and your values and what's most important at the center of all this, despite all this opportunity, all of this energy surrounding you, right? So
Yeah, I mean, and thank you for remembering that. I mean, my husband and I got married a year after college. Again, we got married young. Most people don't. But I knew my life was going to be an adventure with him as my partner, and I couldn't imagine like living with anyone else, doing that adventure with anyone else. We lived apart for 3 years after we got married because he went on 4 almost back-to-back deployments in the Navy. So that was his own adventure, and I think that um, looking at challenge and hardship for the growth opportunities, he and I were just talking about this morning, actually. Not being in the panic zone. Like there's parts of life where I am being stretched too far. This is too hard. I don't want to be kind of permanently in the panic zone. Um, that's not where I want to live, but we do want to live in the challenge zone together. And I think we've been a bit unconventional in how we've made this all work for ourselves. But just having someone who wants you to succeed on your terms as much as you want yourself to succeed. I think not everyone gets to have that, and I don't take for granted that I do.
Yeah, no. If you take anything away from this podcast, I think this is the essence, the crystal here. It takes generative partners supporting each other's journey and helping lift each other up, understanding that's not going to be easy. So we could talk for hours about
For
that.
sure.
Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
So what I'm trying to get at here with the invisible obvious, I've shared with you a little bit offline, is this idea that leaders need greater awareness, personal awareness of who they really are. That's personality, that's leadership style, that's emotional intelligence, it's all these things. And they have an idea of it, I find. They may have done these tests, at different times online or at different companies, but it kind of gets pushed to the side or put in a drawer because they're so busy just trying to keep, their head above water. But that then needs to be integrated in their professional and personal life, right? So it's one thing to have awareness. It's another thing to then take it to the next level of going, okay, I know this about myself. I'm an extrovert. I'm working with people that aren't. How do I need to communicate with them, right? One simple example. And I just don't think many people make the time for that. Again, because we're driven by this growth and productivity mindset, and the softer side and the deeper relational side is just not valued in our society. So my premise is that if you want to do this work, you can go to a whole other level with yourself and your personal life, with your partner, and lead your company in a deeper way, right? So I want you to speak to that, if you could, from your perspective. You talked a little bit about the post already, but how you saw that working in that kind of microcosm of intense business atmosphere. But then how have you wrestled with this as a leader and a founder? Because I know you're conscious about this stuff. Again, you've got 5 children. You've chosen to step away. There's lots of things that are going on. I think you're a good model. So I want people to think about this.
When I was working at the Post, I felt like I was just trying to survive the day every day. And it's interesting because when I think about the news business, the more that I've learned as the years have gone by about how the mind works, the news, particularly in America, the news is overwhelmingly negative. There are studies about this. In fact, the American news cycle is predominantly negative. It's actually more balanced in Europe. And, in the decades since I left the Post, I've gotten much more personally into mindfulness and meditation. I meditate almost every day, often, multiple times a day. And I don't think that healthy self-awareness is necessarily woven into journalistic culture. Maybe by necessity of the news business as it exists today. The platforms are so algorithm driven, negativity driven. And frankly, I think it rubs off on the way that you feel working in these environments. Certainly it can be fun and beautiful and creative, but it also can be neurotic and exhausting.
I would have such a hard time. That was one of my passions. I don't know if I ever shared that with you. If I didn't go into the entertainment business, I would have been a journalist. My uncle wrote for a literary magazine in Chicago, and so that was an influence for me. But boy, I just think about what you just said. It would be so hard for me to battle this cynicism on a daily basis and the negativity, to hold myself up above that and still feel like I was contributing something to the conversation, especially with the divisiveness we're living in now. So difficult. Right?
Yeah, and I do think for the industry itself, it is a moment of realignment and hopefully new imagination about what human beings need to know and the role of reporting and journalism in the world as it moves and changes ever more quickly. I believe it was a Pew study that came out that just even in the last week about the decline of news consumption. Certainly I think it's in part due to the attention economy going more towards social platforms, and people are on YouTube and TikTok and Instagram away from the Washington Posts of the world. I also think it's a reaction to the negativity of those ecosystems and people needing more self-care and well-being in the middle of that kind of negative bombardment. I'm not the only journalist or former journalist to say this. There have been a couple of really interesting essays out there. One, I believe, was in the Washington Post about journalists kind of questioning the just the news cycle, the way that it works, and the role of content in that.
Well, it's becoming, this is a buzzword, but infotainment is so real today, right? I mean, I'm a news junkie too, and I've had to
Mm-hmm.
pull back because it has
Exactly.
just thrown me into a negative space
Yes.
and a isolated space of
Mm-hmm.
feeling, especially living in the part of the country that I live in, where I'm
Mm-hmm.
not in sync with the societal conversation at all, right?
Mm-hmm.
Having been a Yankee my whole life and really been influenced by, more of the Northeastern narrative in terms of the media. But having worked in the media and the entertainment business, there's just a blurred line now. I feel like, they're trying to make TV. They're trying to make something consumable, clickable, accessible, and by that very model, you take away the supposed objectivity and the depthness of what
Yeah.
you're supposed to be doing as a journalist. And so, I just as a side note, I'm finding really fascinating these guys on Substack that are writing and pointing back to journalism, saying you're not covering this the right way. You're taking the bait. You're going in the wrong direction. This isn't the conversation. You shouldn't be a platform for negativity. You should actually dig deeper.
You
And again,
know, I agree with everything that you're saying. And as you know, a person who sat in that seat at the Washington Post, and as a person who's built a media company, and Motherly, over the last decade, the reality is that news organizations, publishers respond to the behavior of their audience. And so, there is a certain responsibility on the individual, or a call to become aware of how the messages, what we click on, right? It shapes what we get. And so, I think an important value at Motherly, for example, we had to create content in the real world. So in a world where kind of negativity sells, or what's getting clicked on, we don't want to be a negative brand. I don't want to be another negative voice in motherhood. So our content standards are that every piece of content has to add um, additive value. It's not just passing along scary or negative information. So if there's a car seat recall, for example, just like, for example, if there's a big car seat recall, we have to make sure that in that article, parents feel empowered. They know what to do with this information. They know what to look for and how to resolve that problem in their lives. We can't just be passing off negativity. And certainly the North Star is, I don't want to say positivity, but being a constructive voice in this ecosystem. So that was always what we were trying to do
yeah,
in Motherly.
define those voices and people that understand that kind of structure, right? Because again, I'm totally with you. The media is giving their audiences what they say they want.
Exactly.
My challenge with that is we're all addicted to negativity,
Yep.
right? So how do you hold yourself up to be the best person you can be? And again, this is the larger umbrella of this work is I'm not trying to change anybody.
Mm-hmm.
I want to know who they are and how they understand that and help them be the best person they can be for themselves, for their family, and relationship as a leader. So it's a deeper conversation. But again, we're working against the societal pressure of just walking out the door every day and being marketed to 24/7 and having content at our fingertips that to me is so fragmented and so overwhelming that I've
Mm-hmm.
literally had to just pull back and
You have
not
to
consume anymore because I just can't synthesize it and it just takes me in a place. But anyway, let's get back to
agree.
leadership. What have you learned then as a co-founder of Motherly? Because we've talked
Mm.
a little bit about this, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a totally remote company.
Yep.
What were some of the challenges like that you kind of had in the back of your mind, but then thought, oh, I hadn't really thought about this as much, and I need to work on this or bring this into my consciousness so I'm helping this company grow in a healthy way and the culture grow in a healthy way or change as it needs to.
Yeah. I would say, I think two interesting and maybe relevant challenges are, what do boundaries look like in a remote work world?
Mhm.
Um, and that was something that I don't think I always got right for myself or for my team.
Mhm.
Um, just to use not silly examples, but specific examples. Like, when we started using Slack 7 or 8 years ago, we didn't have the capacity to send messages later. And if we did, I didn't know about them. So I, co-founder, would post things in Slack when I saw things late at night, early in the morning, during the day. And, my team then would see them and feel like, stressed out that they had to respond to me. And I would tell them afterwards, like, no, you don't need to respond. I'm just putting it there so we know. And reflecting on, what could I have done differently, or could I have been more aware of how those kinds of things affected people working with and for me? I think that's something that is just a real example, to get specific on it. And thankfully now some of the tools are getting smarter, so I don't send messages like late at night or anything like that. I can schedule them. But on a more macro level, when work is at home, which by the way, it has almost always been throughout human history, right? This sort of domestic economy of working from your home. We haven't had this idea of separation. But when work is at home, how do I step away? When work is on my phone, so I can go to preschool drop off in the morning, how do I not get distracted by work messages while I'm driving my son and want to be connected to him? It's the good and the bad. And I think that we're in a time of cultural evolution in understanding that. As a mom of 5 kids who largely employed mothers, not everyone who worked for us is a woman or a mom, but many were. I think remote work is transformational for women, but there's also risks and downsides. And I would say boundaries and integration are a work in progress right now for me. And we encourage people to set their own boundaries, because what might feel healthy to one person um, might not be what the other person wants, but to be clear on what offline time meant, and to be communicative about your desires for that downtime as well.
Yeah, so 100%. And this is things I'm working with people on, especially around work style, right? You spoke to it. Just because you're answering something when it's available to you, there's this false expectation. You read articles about this where, oh, I just got something from the CEO or the founder at 1 o'clock. So I'm compelled, again, because I'm addicted to my phone,
Yep.
to have to respond. And I think what you're saying is absolutely right. You do have to set your own boundaries. You have to have that hard conversation, though, at some point with your manager to say, look, I'm here, I'm responsive. But if I don't respond to you, unless you say I need something, right? And then from a leadership perspective, the
Mm-hmm.
modeling is so important,
It
right?
is.
To articulate that look, we're working in this evolving space and we all have different schedules, and so we're working in between to get things done, but
Yep.
we all have to work together to set healthy boundaries so that the remote culture can live. Otherwise people get burnt out. They might love what they
Absolutely.
do, but they're just like, I can't keep up with this. And
I Yeah, and by the way, one of those burnt out people was me.
yeah,
And so uh, I think another layer of that is alignment, perhaps what I might call it. And what I didn't know starting Motherly, I thought of myself as like a person with passion and skill. And I didn't think of myself as like a phenotype or a type of leader, or
role model leader.
exactly, like what does it mean to embody all of what I bring to the table? So I think over the last decade, as I built this company, I've done a lot more reflecting on, what can I uniquely do? What kind of work brings me energy rather than takes energy from me? What season of life am I in today? And how can I much more creatively build a company, a role, a career that feels more aligned? Because candidly, there were years at Motherly that didn't feel aligned. I felt like I joined a startup. I didn't know what I was getting myself into when I signed up, when we raised venture capital. And then you figure out, like, I have 4 kids, I have 25, people reporting to me. I can't even breathe. And there's no space for that. Right. And so, how do I use my superpowers in a way that no one else can at this company? What can I uniquely bring? And then how can I partner with amazing leaders working with and for me to do things that, I'm not particularly great at, and they are.
Yeah.
And I think I've taken that philosophy then back to motherhood and um, thought about, childcare providers and people who help us at the home as those partners, and I try to constantly reevaluate. I've also had a variety of times, I don't have one now, but I've had a virtual assistant to help me pay the bills and keep on top of things.
Yeah.
Um, because there was a time when I had to hire a babysitter so that I could go do the laundry. And then I realized I
Wait a
should
second.
wait a second. I should probably pay someone to do the laundry so I could spend time with my children. But I was really there, like trying to run a startup and run the household. I was remote. My husband had to commute. So then, of course, I also had the extra load of the home. Like so many moms find themselves in that position. So constantly and iteratively thinking about what's my unique value for this season of life. What can I uniquely bring? What's my leverage? I study a lot of productivity gurus, and a lot of them have changed my life, but few of them are mothers. Most of them are men.
Mhm.
And I'm really passionate about like transforming the best of how to get stuff done for ways that work in the actual lived lives, especially of women, especially of mothers.
Yeah. That's really well said, Liz. I mean, and there's a lot of wisdom there because it takes, I guess, going through the fire and being a person putting out fires
Yep.
to kind of land on the other side and say, wait a second, there's got to be a better way. It's part about alignment. It's part about designating duties. But it's also letting go and understanding where you bring real value and what season you're in. All the things you said. So I appreciate that greatly. I want to keep us going because we could talk for hours, and
Yep.
I know your time is limited. So I like to ask about accountability. You've kind of spoken about that. If you want to expand on that at all, this is a challenge I find too. Everybody talks about, oh, let's have this strategic plan and do all this stuff together, and then, well, and maybe in your role it's different because you've got deadlines that people have to meet. But
Mm-hmm.
every company I've worked at struggles with this accountability piece, and to me, it's usually a reflection of the leader setting expectations that aren't clear about how necessarily to meet, not to him or her directly, but to the manager that they're reporting to. So then the middle manager is only worried about what his manager or her manager says.
Mm.
The senior exec manager is only worried about what the CEO says. So there's this weird disjuncture of energy going on.
Yeah.
And it requires some work. But what have you found in
Mm.
accountability? And we talked about this a little bit with one employee in particular that you had, where that was a real challenge, right? You hired this person remotely and you were like, I handed this off to you. This is my expectation. You're not getting it done. What do we got to do here? So speak to
Mm.
that quickly if you can.
I just think, to me, it always came back to clarity on the mission. I think
Okay.
at these variety of levels, people they want to do a good job. They want to do the job that they think they were hired to do, but they don't always think like the business owner or the CEO. And,
Yeah.
inviting people to think about how do we get the job done? I don't mean how do you do your job as you think you may understand it in a job description that may or may not currently fit your role, but
Mhm.
what are we actually trying to achieve here? Because I think and I know I would explicitly say to people, like, if you could do your job in 10 hours a week, you know, and kind of make space for other interesting work outside of that, like, I'm cool with that. I'm not here to create more, movement. I'm here to get the task done, to hit the KPIs, but more importantly, to achieve the mission that we're here to achieve. And I think when there was a struggle, it was people who were here to do a job but weren't on board with the mission, and they wanted to look good to the person that they were reporting to, but they weren't maybe strategically aligned with, thinking like an owner, thinking like, how do I get the job done in the fewest amount of steps possible, rather than going through all of these motions to
Yeah.
look like I'm on track. And I think, frankly, I mean, my husband worked at a big tech company recently, and I think his frustration was like, um, that feeling of like, I just got to do a bunch of motions to be a part.
Steps. These first.
Exactly, exactly,
Let me just add to what you said there because it reminded me of something very personal. And I've wrestled with this my whole career because I grew up in a family business that's still going after 60 years. I started working when I was 11 years old. Nobody cares about the business like the family.
exactly.
Nobody cares about the business like the founder. So you have to come to some piece of finding people that you hope get in line and really believe in the mission of why you exist and what you're doing, but also realize they're never going to have the personal proximity to it the way you do as the founder. So
I
I
completely agree. I was thinking about that right before our podcast, or before this conversation, that is actually part of what's happened for me over the last 2 years, is coming to peace with, this company that my co-founder and I built, and that I was no longer running full-time day to day. And then I would see things and be like, ooh, that isn't exactly how I would do it. And be like, but guess what? You're not doing it. We've hired these other people. And, I have talked about it, like stepping into the role of grandmother for my company, of
Very young.
like, I just get to kind of admire. I don't necessarily agree with every single thing, but I appreciate and admire the talent that people are bringing to the table today. And, you know, when we're lucky, things as like your family business, like they go on without us. And I think I want that as a mother, and certainly as a business owner, as a human being. Like, I want my time on this earth to have an impact, after I leave.
Yeah.
And so that's, if you're lucky, things will kind of echo on and on. And that's what I'm here for.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And we're just so like-minded in so many ways. There's probably plenty of reasons for that, which I
Mm-hmm.
greatly appreciate about you and our friendship. I'm going to wrap us up here with the final two questions that I like to ask people, which are, again, you can answer however you want, but they are, where do you feel the most vulnerable? And what are you hopeful about? And you can answer that, across personal, professional. You can answer it just from a professional perspective. Everybody seems to answer the hopeful question, in a very positive way, which I guess that's what I'm asking. But I mean, there's some real challenges that we're still wrestling with. I know in your business in particular, the whole automation over to Chat GPT
Oh,
and what's the
sure.
business model going to look like and all that stuff. But the vulnerability thing is really important. I'm trying to do that work myself more and more, especially as I get older and move towards the final phase of my career, especially doing this work. So,
Well, when I started Motherly, I pitched this concept to a proven entrepreneur who I knew had worked in business, my co-founder, because I had never made a pitch deck. I had never raised capital. I had never really worked in Excel. I had no confidence about my business acumen. But looking back, I had great instincts and intuition. I actually also was raised by entrepreneurs and a family business that didn't live on, but watched my parents for a decade build a pretty large entity. So I had it in me, but I didn't have confidence around it. And I think that like not being taken seriously, I look kind of young. I am a woman. I have a higher voice. I don't have a business background. I'm not comfortable in Excel. I can understand things,
yeah.
but not, I don't feel confident there. And I think I feel vulnerable when I'm not taken seriously because of all of those things that I just said. And when I feel insecure about my capacity to deliver on a P&L or, financial documents. But that is the kind of stuff that I've built confidence up, that I'm like directionally right on a lot of things. And the thing that I learned is there are great people who know how to do those things that I get to partner with now. I don't have to be the expert on everything. And nobody is, right? So I can be great at what I'm great at and make sure I'm working with the right people who are good at things that I um more vulnerable about.
Mhm. And
Okay,
then what
last.
makes you hopeful? What makes you hopeful? I guess I mean, with 5 children, you got to be hopeful. You're trying to leave a world for them that they're going to inhabit with all the challenges we're facing on multiple levels right now. But um,
Hmm. You
I,
know, um I actually think what makes me hopeful kind of comes back to the personal journey that I've been on. Maybe I sort of talked about it implicitly, but not explicitly. I think, when I was 18 or 20, I didn't realize it, but I had mostly a fixed mindset about what my life would become. And all the growth has come in these surprising ways that I didn't see my life unfolding. And over those probably last 20 years, I think, developed a growth mindset. Like, I don't know what I'm going to be doing in 10 years. And like, that excites me. And, I've done a lot of work on meditation. I've done a lot of work over the last few years to realign my professional life in a way that, as I mentioned, brings me energy. And therefore, I'm able, and I have been much more able to be mentally present, not just physically present, because I was physically present working remotely in the past, but mentally present with my family in ways that has brought a depth of presence and connection that I'm not sure I've experienced much of my life, because I was a very ambitious teenager and a very ambitious 20-year-old and a very ambitious 30-year-old. And I'm hopeful that life is full now of more aligned twists and turns that are new opportunities to grow and discover things about myself and the world that I don't see coming. And I love that now. So I hope that, by being vulnerable and honest with my kids about the journey that I've been on, that it'll be easier for them to kind of approach some of these challenges with a more open mind than I was.
Yeah, so well said, Liz. Growing into appreciation. And I greatly appreciate you, always have been my pleasure to be on the journey with you and to
Thank
remain in
you.
contact. So I'm really grateful for you making the time today and really having a revelatory conversation, I think. This is stuff that is, in between the cracks that people don't often talk about. And we're not all supposed to be Teflon and, have all the answers, especially as leaders, right? We're work in progress. And so I hope I'm going to find people that want to do this work together. And I'm wishing you, continual success and discernment in this process in all you're doing, a term you know well, I'm sure. And again, thanks so much for your time today. And we'll continue to stay in touch.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me on.
Okay.